huge demand to promote this understanding. And even from Pakistani perspective, of course we know we have very good political, economic, military connections and relations since 1947 or 1950s. But today, there's little cultural communication, especially Islamic Chinese communication. If you look at other countries, for example, Malaysia, they really conducted all this research, for example, Confucianism, Islam dialogue. And of course, Indonesia followed. And even, of course, Western countries, they have already done much research on Confucian Islamic dialogue from Harvard University. Now in China, of course, you also have Peking University. So what I mean here is basically Pakistan has done such dialogue, especially in terms of Chinese Islamic. So that's why here I want to briefly present the history of Pakistan from a global perspective. And we will understand the dilemma Pakistan will face, especially in terms of communication or cultural exchange with East Asia or China. Okay, turn to the next page. Oh, yes. So here, as you can see, I mean, a very simple point. If we look at Pakistan, if we look at history, geography, and the cultures, it's really hard to position Pakistan. Of course, I listed several empires you can see, at least from Abbasid, Arabic or Arab Empire, if you will, then to Persian neighbor Safavid Empire, then of course to the latest Mughal Turkic Empire, if you will. It's really hard from geographically and culturally, and of course you can see the location, the position of Pakistan. And I believe this issue even bothers Pakistan today. So that's why how can you define Pakistan with a larger historical culture unit? Are you part of Abbasid Empire? Are you part of Safavid Empire? Or are you part of Mughal Empire? Of course, we tied it to Mughal Empire simply because it's the latest. Of course, Pakistan is supposed to inherit Mughal heritage. But actually, reality is not. I'll talk about later on the challenges Pakistan really face. And also the only way you can find here is Pakistan actually, from historical perspective, geographic perspective, cultural perspective, always has been a frontier. Always has been a crossroad. That's why Turks can come to Pakistan, Arabs can come to Pakistan, of course later on, Persians. So that's why the only factor that unites this land, different groups, different Muslim groups, is Islam. So that's why you can see all these empires, the geography, the maps, said it's really hard to define the position of Pakistan. And the next one. And of course, this situation is basically similar today. For example, from 1947, when we look at Pakistan, of course, as Ambassador Chandler just mentioned, Pakistan was made as a hometown or as a nation state for Muslim population in the Mughal Empire. But if you look at Mughal Empire, especially if you look at geography, even today, of course, as we know, Taj Mahal and other cultural sites are basically located in India. So here we have kind of discrepancy. Pakistan claimed to be the successor of Mughal Empire, but if you look at the cultural heritage, it's actually located in India. And also, if you look at, as I mentioned, from historical perspective, Arab, Abbasid, Persian, Safavids, not today to Mughal, right? We have a dispute or even debate about who inherited Mughal heritage. And here, again, as I said, from historical to contemporary period, the only factor uniting all people in this country, in this land, again, is Islam. Not back to 10th century, 11th century, 15th century, 16th century, even 21st century. Islam is only factor to unite Pakistan. So that's the reason why we think Pakistan was made as kind of, in Chinese people always believe Pakistan actually means the land of pure, or the land of Islam. And of course, you have other explanations to say Pakistan represents different regions and provinces, but you can imagine here, Islam is the only unifying factors. Now we talk about how can you communicate with East Asia, with China. You not really always look from the West, from opposite perspective. That's the Arab, empire or imperial frontier. That's the Safavid frontier. That's the Mughal frontier. But if you look at it from East Asia, if you look at it from China, as I said, it's really difficult to define the status, especially cultural status of Pakistan. So that's why Pakistan is really a combination. You have, Western part, very Islamic, if you will, very early Arab there. You have Turks, you have Safavids. That's why you have Persian culture, you have Arabic culture, you have Turkic culture, you have Mughal culture, every culture. So that's why I said for Pakistan, it's really hard, especially today, to have kind of cultural identity. And of course, no matter from Pakistani perspective or from Muslim perspective, I think most of the people in this country, of course, identify as Muslim. So that's why you can see all these historical empires to today, Islam is the only unifying factor. Now, when we talk about Islam, now we go back to contemporary China-Pakistan relations. And of course, you can imagine Chinese-Arab relations, you do have kind of Arabic culture, Arabic literature, Arabic everything. Especially you have all these Arabic or Arab nation states. So that's why you don't have to talk about Islam. You can still have kind of Chinese-Arab communication. You have Egyptian dance, Egyptian something with Chinese. But when you talk about Pakistan, it's very difficult. And also you can talk about Persian or Iran. It's very easy. You don't have to talk about Islam. You can talk about Persian art, you can talk about Persian language, Persian culture, right? So that's why here, as I said, when you talk about China-Pakistan relations, you have to talk about Islam from both perspectives, Chinese and Pakistan. First, Chinese always identify Pakistan as part of Islamic world. That is true. You can see from here, different empires, that's the frontiers, and of course today Pakistan is a very influential Muslim country. That's the reason. But it's good or not to be part of Islamic world from Chinese perspective. Of course, go back to 1950 to 1970s. China, of course, always allied with the so-called developing world, or so-called the third world. And of course, Pakistan very close to China at that time. But nowadays, we have to face the sweeping Islamophobia. Very common everywhere, from United States to Europe to China. So now you can imagine what's the problem to associate Pakistan with Islam, which means Islamophobia now hate Chinese audience. So that's why if you look at China back to 10 years ago, when we talk about Islamophobia, we always talk about Arabs, we always talk about Wahhabis, we always talk about these Middle Easterners. But nowadays, when you have all these huge projects, especially CPEC, especially building the road, people begin to talk about what? Pakistanis. And many people don't really understand what's the difference between Arabs and Pakistanis. And of course, from national perspective, it's different country. But from cultural, religious perspective, I don't really think many Chinese know what's the difference, especially if you look at all these frontier regions in today's Pakistan, Balochistan, or all this region. They still believe that's part of the Middle East. And that's true culturally, if you will. But that's also the origin problem. So that's why Islamophobia, I remember during the past 2 or 3 years, I exchanged ideas with Professor Iqbal about Islamophobia in China. It's basically attacking Pakistan as well, after Arabs. So now how can you have a proper culture exchange if you are perceived as kind of, Islamic, perceived as kind of fundamentalist, and also unfortunately for Pakistan, you have Afghanistan there. You have a war, you have Taliban, you have ISIS, you have all these forces that China or other countries perceive as kind of very evil, if you will. So that's what Pakistani image in China today. And also if you look at social media, even for very simple example, some Pakistani students said, oh, okay, someone committed some crime, then you can imagine that small matter can be expanded to the image of Islam, to the Muslim. And of course, encourage the framework of cultural communication between the two countries. And I think there is no proper platform to talk about all these issues. You can contact with, for example, Cultural Ministry of China. They may have kind of program with Pakistan You may sponsor some artists, you can sponsor some musicians, dancers, but you cannot find a place, a unit, or ministry, or a commission to talk about all these real challenges, such as Islamophobia, which really target Pakistanis, Afghans, all the Central Asian populations. And even historically, as I just mentioned, if you look at Pakistan, used to be frontier of all these several empires, even in terms of communication with China. Throughout history, Pakistan actually was marginal. For example, in 15th century, we know China sent a huge fleet to the Indian Ocean, East Africa, Persian Gulf, and they really built huge, connection with the Islamic world. But because when Pakistan partitioned in 1947, now if you look at Pakistan territory, we cannot really find, for example, several famous ports where you can find historical Chinese archaeology or Chinese legacy or Chinese culture, because all these regions, if you look at Mahabharata, all these regions now belong to India. So that's why it's a dilemma, even for historical communication between Pakistan and China. So that's why one of the problems I face is, originally I said, we need to build this forum, named after this great Chinese Muslim empire in Indian Ocean. Try to bring Muslim countries and China for deeper historical understanding. We actually had a connection. That's true, but not for Pakistan. Why? When Chinese fleet went to the Indian Ocean, of course they went to Southeast Asia, Bengal, they went to west coast and east coast of India, today's India. They went to Persian Gulf, they went to Arabia, they went to East Africa. But with Pakistan, of course, at that time, Pakistan was frontier, of course. You cannot have great ports or cities to attract the business or diplomacy. So that's why I said, even today, for Chinese Pakistan cultural communication, it's very difficult. You have little resources. And I talked to some professors and scholars before, say, hey, how can we bring Pakistan into this forum to talk about historical and cultural communication? I said, well, if Pakistan says, oh, this west coast of India, then we can talk and say, no, that's impossible. But you can imagine, Malabar, Kerala, all these regions, they host historical port. So that's why actually today it's easy to talk about China-Indian cultural communication. And probably you already noticed the fact to several months ago, when President Xi Jinping visited India, they visited a city, historical city. Does anyone know that city? It's President Xi Jinping met with Modi. I think that's name is Chennai. Yeah, Chennai, right? So that's historical port. And actually, India possesses more such resources. And I would believe in future, for example, Kerala, Malabar, there will be huge potential for China to develop deeper historical, cultural, archaeological connection with India. But of course, so far, India and China have kind of strategic rivalry, that kind of position. It's really hard for China to have like localized, close, regional communication. But that's a potential. And Pakistan, as I said, because of the frontier status, even in 15th century, even today, you have limited cultural resources, or even little cultural resources. So that's why I'm hoping in future, actually, Pakistan can play a very positive role. First is to look east. Because as I said, if you look at all these empires, they were basically from the west. No matter Abbasid Empire, Persian Empire, Safavids Empire, or what Mughal Empire from northwest, right? But if you want to look east, if you want to eliminate Islamophobia, if you want to develop kind of sustainable relationship with China, you have to first face Islamophobia, which is not simply targeting Arabs anymore. Also target Central Asians. Second, you need to discover the way how to utilize all these historical connections. Of course, as I said, you have little connections. Most of the cultural sites now located in India, right? But of course, you still have some kind of Mughal legacy. For example, the Chinese emperor go back to 18th century, really composed a lot of poems to praise the Hindustan jade. And of course, you can imagine that kind of cultural exchange, in terms of literature, poem, and also, of course, you can imagine if we explore deeper religious connection. For example, Naqshbandi, Sufi Talik could be one of the resources. But again, these religious topics could be sensitive. So that's why I hope Pakistan and other countries together can build a larger platform, not only for Pakistan, as I said. The only unifying factor for Pakistan is Islam, at least in the eyes of China, in the eyes of East Asia. And actually, I was fortunate to attend the Kuala Lumpur summit, I think on December 18 to 20. And of course, other countries attended, like Malaysia, like Turkey, like Qatar. I think Imran Khan supposed to come, but because of the reason, he didn't. But of course, you can say if Pakistan participate, not politically, but at least culturally, with countries in Southeast Asia, East Asia, then you can change the image of Pakistan, not simply as historical frontier of Middle Eastern countries, or Middle Eastern empires, Central Asian empire, but you can actively interact with Southeast Asia. For example, during the Mughal time, you have all these Muslim traders very active in Southeast Asia. And of course, we know some of the missionaries came from Gujarat, which is part of India today, but of course, Pakistan can still, claim that kind of heritage simply because Pakistan today still is a Muslim country. And also, of course, we know some of Indian Muslims came to China as well. But when we use the term Indian, go back to Mughal time, it's more like an imperial empire, right? But Pakistan, I think, actually, there's a really kind of competition, obviously, between India and Pakistan to claim all these historical resources. But in current context, India, of course, obviously, they have some kind of constraint because they try to highlight Hinduism, which means Islam is not really important. But for Pakistan, I think this actually is an opportunity to look east, to explore historical sources, try to build good connection with Southeast Asia and China, to build what people call like the Southern China or South China Sea connection. Because today we see the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy of the US, we see the Chinese and Maritime Belt and Road. So this is an opportunity for Pakistan to build all this cultural connection with Southeast Asia and China especially. If you cannot change the Chinese image about Pakistan, you cannot really defeat or combat Islamophobia. I think for the long run, if you only look for money, for project, but you do not really have a cultural foundation, which is really dangerous. So that's my simple observation in the past several years. I want to research on Islamophobia, I want to visit all these countries. I also did research on Chinese social media. So I hope our colleagues in Pakistan can also, actively involve in this kind of project to combat Islamophobia and promote a positive, modern image of Islam, which actually distance Pakistan from the Middle East. As I said, if today people talk about Islam, talk about Muslim, they are basically defined by Middle East, Arabs, ISIS, Syrians, Iraqs. So of course we do understand Pakistani connection with Saudi Arabia, all the political, economic, military reasons, but culturally, I think it's beneficial for Pakistan to look east, especially Southeast Asia and East Asia. So I think that's my very simple presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I must say that you did raise some very thought-provoking ideas, but you might wish to also